tripping on shrooms with 12 of your best friends and a dog, the Oaxaca mushroom experience. Over the years I have had some life-altering psychedelic experiences, from dropping acid in the middle of a hurricane to drinking a concoction of peyote for a week. I have taken a plunge into the deep of psychedelia. One of these trips happened to me while I was road tripping in the mountains of Oaxaca, Mexico to a little place called San Jose del Pacifico. Technically, I was on my way back from the beach, which sat at the foot of the mountain. San Jose sat near one of the peaks of the mountain at 2,440 meters, 8,000 feet, above sea level. To reach the destination you have to drive 2 to 3 hours up through a series of mountains on a narrow 2-lane highway which often have speeding buses carrying passengers, and in some cases chickens, between the towns scattered everywhere. Needless to say, the journey towards San Jose is not for those who have a fear of heights. The road, which doesn't get a lot of maintenance, often have large chunks missing, which in turn converts the 2-lane highway into a one-way tightrope experience. After your ears have popped due to the sudden change in atmospheric pressure, and once you have successfully driven higher than the clouds, you will find San Jose del Pacifico. As you drive through town, you'll notice a few lodgings advertised promising the authentic cabin experience. Perhaps it's the very myth of San Jose that makes it special, or that there are over 300 different species of mushrooms that grow natively in the area. Allegedly, the Beatles tripped in those mountains with Maria Sabina. A few years earlier, a friend of mine told me about this place in the mountains where you can rent a cabin for cheap, buy mushrooms, opium and weed for next to nothing. I'll explain more now how to get the full Oaxaca mushroom experience below. While the group experience was fun and definitely a beautiful psychedelic trip, I wanted to have a more intimate experience with the substance. I have always had a pull towards mushrooms, and to this day I'm fascinated with all kinds, not just the psychedelic ones. My wife didn't want to take the journey the second time, but was cool with hanging back and smoking some weed while I trip. Nonetheless, after a few hours of snaking up a mountainside and checking into our cabin, I was ready for the trip. I spoke with the guy who was going to do the preparations for the experience and scheduled it for 7 AM the next day. The day of the mushroom trip. I typically like to take mushrooms on an empty stomach, which is why I scheduled the trip so early. This is because I wasn't just going to be taking a mushroom trip, I was also going to do a temazcal, which is a Mayan sweat lodge. It's an enclosed space, often looking like an igloo of sorts, with a fire pit in the center. After you climb into the space, which is not spacious by any means but also not entirely cramped, the guy begins loading piping hot stones into the center of the space. Once the entryway is closed, it becomes pitch black and temperature quickly begins to climb. This is because for the next 2 to 3 hours I'll be taking a concoction of herbs and plants found in the area, and dousing it on the heated river rocks. You begin sweating, it gets hard to breathe, and all the while, you're sitting in pitch blackness with only your thoughts and a bucket of mountain tea. There, on the table I saw my mushroom tea, prepared. My wife was sitting next to me asking me how it went in the temazcal. I responded, good. When I was good and ready, I took the mushroom tea and in one chug, down about 7 to 8 small psychedelic mushrooms. With mushrooms, there's a sense of nausea that appears for a moment. At least, this has been a consistent experience whenever I consumed mushrooms. It's not unbearable nausea, more like the type of nausea you experience when you're reading a book in a moving car. Nonetheless, the nausea kicked in round about 15 minutes after taking it, and at that point I took a joint and decided to go for a walk. The thing about tripping on mushrooms in the woods in San Jose is that you're thousands of feet above sea level, and while it's easy to climb downwards, the way back up isn't. Many trippers have found themselves stuck on the side of the mountain because while they were tripping they thought it a good idea to explore, only to realize they didn't bring enough food or water for the way back. Mushrooms is a very earthy drug, and when you're taking the drug in its natural environment, you become intimately connected with your environment. To someone on the outside, this probably looked like a deranged madman losing his shit and wallowing in the dirt. However, I was merely going with the flow at that point. The trip picked up rather quickly in intensity, which forced me to have to move to a less earthy area, This was going to be the place where I would spend most of my trip. I saw my wife, who was talking to the guide, and simply pointed to the water and some food, and a chair I could take. And with that, I left with a bit of weed, some water and some nuts, and made my way back to the rock. By this time, I was in full trip. As I sat there in my fold-out chair on a rock on the side of a mountain, I began noticing hallucinations happen in the space between things. I may not have understood consciously what was going on, but to my soul it felt as if I was witnessing some holy moment. I thought to myself, perhaps this was what Moses saw when he went up that mountain and came back with etchings on stones. Eventually, the halo disappeared and what was left was a moment I can only describe as the Great Big Blob. As I was lying there, immersed in one of the most vivid psychedelic experiences of my life, my perspective shifted completely. I no longer saw the empty space as empty, but rather a soup of molecules all vibrating at different frequencies that created the illusion of matter. Like pixels on a screen, though we appear to be separate, this is merely the illusion of who we are in time and space.